All right, let's discuss this further. With me here in studio is Ambassador Boaz Mbaya, an international relations expert and former Kenyan ambassador to France. Ambassador Mbaya, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we have France trying to bring order to the C.A.R. Citizens there, on the other hand, accusing it of being partisan. What options does France have?
I think we need to put France's participation into perspective. One, France has not gone to Central African Republic on its own. It is exercising the mandate of the United Nations Security Council together with the African Union. So they are not there to pursue necessarily French bilateral interests, but of course that will be at the back of every action that the French involvement may mean. However, in terms of what we expect from French participation, I think we have to see it in the whole context of what we need to have achieved by the AU, by the international community, to stabilize the situation in Central African Republic, rather than simply look at France's participation per se.
But as we've had in that story, France's home support, of course, is waning. So could we be seeing a change in voting patterns and perhaps a change in future policy on Africa?
I doubt that very much. France pursues through what you call Francophonie, group of countries, the equivalent of the Commonwealth for the Anglophone countries. It pursues a very active policy in Africa, where they develop bilateral relations through that organization, but also directly by France itself. So I don't think there's going to be necessarily a change of policy. There may be a change of who becomes the next president of France, but that is a domestic matter. I don't think it's going to be decided by a foreign policy issue.
Right. The poll showed more support for France in its operation in Mali as opposed to the C.A.R. Why is that? And why is it that France feels it needs to have a hand in these countries?
I suspect, one, there were hostages, French hostages in Mali, and therefore the support from the population in France was more sympathetic to French action. And they eventually released a number of hostages from Mali, held by the Tuareg rebels and so on, and also the Al-Qaeda groups. In Central Africa, you don't find that kind of situation existing. But France still feels that as a former colonial power in Africa, and particularly in C.A.R., Mali, and other Francophone countries, they still feel an obligation to try and see that there is stability in those countries. So I don't think it's necessarily a question of Mali versus the C.A.R., but I think it's the national interest of France that determined what was happening in Mali because of the threat to French lives. There is no threat to French lives in C.A.R., although 2 soldiers have already died. But there is no hostage, French hostage held in C.A.R.
Then some would argue that initially in Mali, France seemed to be quite successful, but now we're seeing the militants seemingly making their presence back again in Mali. So just how successful then will France be in C.A.R., or perhaps do they need to re-strategize?
We need to look at it in the context of United Nations Security Council decision. It is the United Nations Security Council that will either fail or succeed, and France is simply doing their bidding. AU is also acting under the same mandate. So we shouldn't look at French's participation as a bilateral failure by France. We should look at it as an international community concern as to what is happening in the C.A.R. And France is simply part of that. France knows C.A.R. better than any other country in the world, so they are in a position to help much better than anybody else could ever dream about. But as to popularity, whether it is going to affect the success or failure of President Francois Hollande, we have also to look at what has happened in the last 10, 12 years. The West has intervened in Iraq, it has intervened in a number of other countries, and this seems to be against the grain of Islamic belief, and they think that the West is out to finish the Muslims. I don't think that is necessarily the case in the Central African Republic, no.
All right. Thanks very much for those insights, Ambassador Boaz Mbaya, joining us here in studio.